Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And now, here are your hosts, Scott and Jesse from CompassKnox.com.
Hello, and welcome back once again to Compass Points, the weekly podcast where we talk about Knoxville news, events, government, politics, and anything else that catches our attention. I am Jesse Mayshark, co-founder, co-publisher of Compass at CompassKnox.com, and I am joined for this special edition of Compass Points After Hours by Scott Barker, who is also co-publisher and co-founder of Compass. How are you doing this evening, Scott?
I'm doing great, Jesse. How are you doing? I'm getting ready to go establish the Compass Gulf Shores Bureau.
I like it. Little beachfront office down there.
We're gonna establish that bureau. It's only gonna be a temporary bureau, but for a little bit, we will cover anything and everything that happens in Gulf Shores, Alabama, related to Knox County.
At least within reaching distance of your beach umbrella and your.
Well, I'm gonna stay under the umbrella. Right. I'm a fair-skinned guy.
Yeah, no, I think that's. I recommend that. Use your sunscreen, all of that. Well, and because of that, we're actually taping at a slightly different time here. Of course, to the people listening, this doesn't make a difference, but it makes a difference to us because we're taping on Thursday evening here with our producer, Lord Seth Barber at Barbarian Studios, and it just gives it a little bit of a different vibe. Seth has provided us with a couple of beverages. I have a nice little glass of rum here, and Scott's got a little Jameson. So,
yes.
I feel like we're usually pretty candid on this show. I don't feel like we hold things back much, but maybe we will be even more so tonight. We'll see.
Well, yeah. Well, you never know. I mean, we could go really fast with these and get really, really fun toward the end of the show.
I've always thought, and I've said this to other people, that public meetings, government meetings, I think would be greatly improved with the addition of a bar. First of all, for those of us who just have to kind of sit through them, it's just kind of nice to have a drink to sip on. But I also think that, if alcohol were available to our elected officials and members of the audience, it would just kind of liven these things up a little bit.
It would liven them up. In some cases, it might liven them up a little too much.
Well,
but
that just makes it more fun for us.
I was about to say there's more things for us to write about. So,
all right. Well, we do have some things to talk about from this past week. In fact, almost everything we're going to talk about has to do with education, because this was an active week for both the University of Tennessee and also for Knox County Schools. Lots of things kind of in the air. We're going to talk about a survey that just came out, Scott, that you just wrote about, faculty sentiment on the College of Arts and Sciences and its future.
Right.
There was a state ranking that came out for school systems across the state that put Knox County Schools in the very lowest position, the first time it's ever been down there, and that led to a lot of discussion. We'll talk about that. Another set of rankings, lots of rankings this week, none of them having to do with football. The U.S. News and World Report rankings came out, and we'll talk a little bit about how the University of Tennessee fared there, and also whether anybody really takes this seriously or if they should. We had a visit this week from First Lady Jill Biden, which was interesting both for its substance. She talked about education issues and teacher recruitment specifically, and also for some of the kind of ambient politics surrounding it. And we're going to start out back at UT, back on the increasingly crowded Knoxville campus. You wrote a story about the housing crunch specifically facing UT students. What's going on?
Yeah, they're cheek by jowl over there. Apparently, the Board of Trustees Executive Committee met last Friday, and they talked. One of the big things they were wanting to tout was the record size of the freshman class. 15.1% larger than last year's.
And last year's was a record
as well. So it's a couple of years of records. Enrollment is up to a little bit over 33,000. It was up. The overall enrollment was up 6.6% at UT Knoxville, and President Randy Boyd and some of the other trustees were talking about how great that is. One of the things that they've wanted to do was increase enrollment, and they increased enrollment, and there's no place to put anybody. Now that's the big thing is housing for students is at a premium. They've got 2 new dorm buildings in the pipeline, but they haven't been approved yet, much less have ground broken on them. They suspended the requirement that that students within 50 miles live on campus, so they could stay at home.
Right. Anybody who's already got a place in their mom's basement.
In theory, they could stay at home. And what happens is they end up trying to get into the apartment market in Knoxville, and we'll talk about that in a second too. But they've also gone to the extraordinary measure of actually leasing a hotel, the Holiday Inn Express on Paper Mill, and they're
and shuttling students back and forth. Right?
Students back and forth. They're running it like a dorm. I mean, it's got limited access. I mean, you can't go there and rent a room next to the college kids or anything. I mean, it's all for them, and it's got 100 single rooms and 34 or 100 double rooms and 34 single rooms. So, you can put a couple hundred kids in there, and they can go, but not optimum, of course.
Well, not a permanent solution.
Not a permanent solution, and this gets exacerbated by the fact that Knoxville's private sector housing market for rental housing is full. There's 99% occupancy.
We've talked about.
We've reported that it's at 99% occupancy. Rents are going up out of the reach of a lot of college kids, and so there's a real crunch on them, and finding a place to stay and study is going to be really difficult, and it's to the point that they are considering, although they don't want to say it, considering just capping enrollment at UT Knoxville.
Instead, because they've been on this real push, and Randy Boyd, especially since he's been president, has really been pushing to build their enrollment, seeing that as kind of the key to UT's future, and really kind of going against these prevailing trends at the national level where there are fewer students overall of college age.
Right.
But he's made a point that he wants UT to really compete fiercely, especially within the state, outside the state as well, but to bring in more and more so that UT is getting a higher percentage of the sort of available student population.
Yeah, that's a real big push. It's one of the reasons that they are looking at enhancing their online degree program availability. So it's they're looking at basically becoming part regular university experience and part an online only experience, which could in theory bring in students from all over the United States, maybe all over the world,
who wouldn't need housing.
So that's a way to get more students without building more housing, but they're going to need more housing.
Right.
And the private sector is there's a response to that.
We just talked about the huge development on Cumberland Avenue.
Right. It's huge development. more than 800 units. There's another large development that's already under construction down Cumberland Avenue. There's talk about some more developments on South Waterfront, which is just across the river from campus. But all these things take time to build. We've got the big development on Cumberland, 800 units on 4 different lots. They just bought those properties.
Right.
They haven't evicted anybody yet, and they haven't started tearing them down.
Several years.
Yeah, it's going to be a long time before those apartments are online. So there's a real there's a lot of pressure on the rental market in Knoxville, and it's there's really no short-term solution to it. There's
Right.
long-term solution, of course, is building more units, but they'll take time. So.
And that problem, as you mentioned, that's just going to continue to exacerbate the challenges in the market for the non-college student rental population, which has seen rents rise across the city. Obviously, UT is not the only thing driving that, but it is one thing adding extra pressure there.
Right.
Okay. Also, this past week, we had a visit from Jill Biden, First Lady Jill Biden, wife of President Joe Biden. Education has always been, she is a teacher herself. She's actually still an active
she's teaching now.
teacher.
She didn't retire or take a leave of absence. She's in the classroom.
So that's, as First Lady, that has really, as it was when Biden was Vice President, that was kind of her major passion. As First Lady, it is again, and she visited this past week to highlight the state of Tennessee's Grow Your Own program, which is a program it's at the state level, and then it's one that local districts, including Knox County, are kind of availing themselves of at the local level. And the whole idea with Grow Your Own, it has some different, there's different versions of it basically, but it is to kind of use existing resources to try to build the next generation of teachers rather than, because school systems across the country, including Knox County, are having difficulty filling all of their open teaching slots, especially in some particular areas like special education is always a real challenge. Those are very hard jobs. They require certain kinds of expertise. And so Knox County is doing a few things. They have some current education assistants. So these are people who are working in the school system but don't have teaching degrees, sometimes don't have college degrees. They're basically, they're kind of the classroom assistants, but they're people who are obviously committed to education, committed to kids. And so Knox County is now on its second cohort. I think they have a total of about 50 who have moved through these 2 cohorts of education assistants, existing staff who are doing basically after hours remote instruction, so they can work their regular job during the day, be home with their families, and then do a couple of hours of online work at night and earn their bachelor's degree and their master's degree and be a certified teacher and be paid while they're doing their student teaching. Right. Because one of the big challenges for people becoming teachers is there's that year where you have to do a year of student teaching. Yeah. Traditionally, that has not been paid. That's just, you're like a college student. You pay for it. Right. But a lot of the people who they're trying to attract to this are, adults with families. They can't afford, even if they can take those evening classes, they can't afford to take that whole year off to go and be an unpaid student teacher. This program actually lets them be paid while they're doing that. And another aspect of it is actually encouraging current Knox County students, because there's this big push in our schools to really kind of define career pathways for high school students in particular and make them think really concretely about what they might be interested in, what are the best ways for them to, achieve that. And so for any students who are interested in being teachers, Knox County is encouraging them and working with UT. The idea is you kind of grow your own. You build your own pipeline where your students graduate from Knox County Schools, they go to UT or maybe one of our other, Johnson University. There's other teacher preparation schools around here. But they do their student teaching in Knox County Schools and they come right back and teach in Knox County Schools, and that you kind of have your own dedicated path that way. So that's what First Lady Biden's visit was about. She came, she kind of did a photo op, stop off at Sarah Moore Green Magnet Academy, which was filmed by the Today Show because there was a whole partnership with Pinterest as well, where Pinterest came in and redid the Teachers Lounge. And then she went over to the University of Tennessee campus, and there was sort of a whole meeting there about the Grow Your Own program at UT. She spoke. U.S. Secretary of Education Miguel Cardona was also here with her. He spoke as well. And then State Education Commissioner Penny Schwinn was also there to kind of tout the benefits of this Grow Your Own program and to thank the First Lady for being there. So that was what happened. It was a lot of foofara and to-do. Like we've seen these kinds of White House visits and so forth before. It's a big deal. Everybody gets very excited for a day or so.
But there's always a whiff of politics around
more than a whiff of politics
around any visit from the White House or the First Lady or anybody else. So
absolutely,
what did this past week's politics smell like around that?
Well, so the backdrop to all of this, of course, is that we're just 2 months out, less than 2 months out from the midterm elections, which there's a lot of attention on. And both parties, Democrats and Republicans, are kind of trying to seize education as a core issue in very different ways. And the Republican Party has kind of been emphasizing parent choice, parent engagement, all the way up to, sort of like parent interference, you could argue, with, education materials, wanting to give parents more say over what happens in schools, and also wanting to give them more say about where they send their kids to school. Hence, Governor Lee's, emphasis on charter schools and on school vouchers, kind of broadening the kinds of schools that we're going to use public money to pay for. The Democratic side is much more built around championing traditional public schools, that public education's for everybody. We need to support our teachers. And so, they're both kind of running on education, but from slightly different angles. And I don't think it was lost on anybody. Now, I don't think that, Jill Biden came to East Tennessee thinking that her visit here was going to affect congressional campaigns in Tennessee. We all know that our own congressional district, for example, is very heavily Republican, and I don't think 6 visits from the White House is going to affect that at all. But it's a way to, the Today Show was here. She's out there getting national media, getting national attention, arguably using Knoxville and Knox County as kind of a backdrop to say, look how much I care. Here I am with these kids. Here I am with these teachers. Although I will say the teachers who I talked to, the education assistants who I talked to who got to meet her were, thrilled and kind of starstruck and said she was very friendly and, they just loved the whole experience. The other side of this was that when Joe Biden landed at McGee-Tyson Airport, she was greeted there, and she landed on a Sunday night. She was greeted by Knoxville Mayor India Kincannon. Of course, she's here to talk about education. She was here to visit schools. The city of Knoxville, as we know, does not have any jurisdiction over Knox County Schools. It's a county function. You could argue, McGee-Tyson Airport is a city asset. It's governed by a board whose members are all appointed by the mayor and city council. It was established by the city of Knoxville, and it's pretty traditional for city mayors to go out there to greet visiting dignitaries. That's not unusual. Still, people noticed that there were no county representatives either at the airport. There were no county representatives, including Superintendent John Ryswick was not even able to go when she visited Sarah Moore Green Magnet Academy because, they were running such a tight ship and they only allowed in basically the kids and teachers who were supposed to be there and a whole bunch of media so everybody could take pictures. But there wasn't really room for a lot of other people there. And of course, there was a ton of security. Now, at the event at UT, that was more open. And of course, Penny Schwinn was there. She was the only prominent Republican, representing Governor Bill Lee, obviously, who was on stage at the event. It was interesting that the Speaker of the House, Cameron Sexton, was apparently there. I didn't see him, but I heard this. He was standing at the back of the room, well out of camera range. And even when, so Penny Schwinn was on stage with Jill Biden, and thanked her personally and everything. But in her own social media about that day, she posted a little collage of photos from being at the University of Tennessee, talking about the Grow Your Own program, showed teachers and everything else. Not only didn't have a picture of Jill Biden, didn't tag Jill Biden, didn't mention Jill Biden. As far as you know, from Penny Schwinn's social media, UT just had a big event around Grow Your Own, and she came there to talk at it, and that was it. So, I don't think any of that is really that big a deal. It's just, and I heard from some people who thought it was kind of insulting say that County Mayor Glenn Jacobs wasn't invited because the schools are under the county. Well, first of all, the county mayor does not directly govern the schools either. That's under the school board. But the other thing I wondered is, would Glenn Jacobs, who is thinking about running for governor in a couple of years, want a photo of him with Jill Biden, floating around social media out there, just waiting to be used by some future primary opponent? I mean, I kind of doubt it. So I think it's probably true that he wasn't invited. They did not go out of their way, obviously, to engage local Republican officials. I also think it's likely that most of those officials were probably perfectly happy to not be anywhere close to it.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, you're right. One of the, when the White House comes to visit, and I've covered several of those. They do run a very tight ship. They do exclude people. They want to and a lot of that's security driven. They want to manage.
The federal government is not renowned for its sensitivity to local sensibilities.
They really don't care.
Yeah.
And then there's that, and then there's also the tendency, especially of the locals, when someone comes from the White House, a lot of these things get magnified, and there are a lot of slights, and you make a big mountain out of a molehill about whether you sat next to the dignitary or three chairs down, or in the row behind the that kind of jockeying gets discussed quite a bit,
and can be a little silly,
and is a little silly, and sometimes it might mean something, sometimes it might not, but usually it doesn't.
Yeah, I mean, my impression was very much that the First Lady it was part of a 2-state tour. They went on to North Carolina. Clearly, this was not really pitched at us here in East Tennessee. We were the location for it. We were the setting, but I don't think we were really the target audience. So anyway, always interesting when you get these sort of like flybys from upper-level dignitaries. Moving on, we had the annual rankings from U.S. News and World Report came out this week. Every year, they rank colleges of all kinds across the country. And every year, we look at it to see how UT stacks up. And so, how did it look?
Well, UT overall slipped a little. The rankings that I was most interested in were the public universities. There's the national universities ranking that includes, the Ivy League schools and everybody else. I really don't look at those a whole lot because, that's always heavy on the private schools at the top.
UT's not really competing with Yale.
No, they're not competing with Yale. And 19 of the top 20, the top 19 slots went to private schools. They went to Harvard and Yale, and Princeton was number one. Vanderbilt was up there. All those schools. And so I looked at the national public universities, and last year UT was at 43. This year slipped back to they were at 46 and slipped back to 53 this year.
But there were ties too, right? So
it always
kind of exaggerates how big a difference.
Yeah, it is. There are always ties, and so you're not, and also it's not like the football top 25 or whatever. I mean, these guys don't play each other,
right.
But UT was tied with the University of South Carolina and Rutgers University at Newark.
Right. Not the main Rutgers
which
campus.
is their secondary campus. It's their number 2 campus. New Brunswick is the top campus, and it was on there as well, but higher up. the list tends to be dominated by first the University of California system. 6 of the top 10 schools were University of California schools. Berkeley number 1, UCLA, but then Cal Davis and all the other Cal schools are up there too, and State University of New York, which a lot of people down here don't pay attention to because they don't play football, or at least they don't play major college football. They may have Division III schools.
I believe Buffalo has a team. I don't know what division.
I don't know, but there were several State University of New York schools that were ranked well ahead of UT in that, and a lot of other schools. I'm not going to single out UT, but UT ranked 53rd. Now the individual programs that UT is known for, primarily their logistics program, but also accounting and marketing and nursing and engineering, they were all highly rated as well, and either kept or improved their rating. The logistics program has always been one of the top ones in the country. It was number 3 again this year.
And I believe that's now one of the largest departments, schools within the university.
It is. It's one of the largest majors within the university, and it's also one of the most renowned. They are UT logistics grads go to the biggies. They go to Amazon and and all these other places where logistics is their life, and that's where they go. So on the flip side, I guess we can blame UT grads for the supply chain issues.
Right.
We've had. I don't want to go there. I don't know enough about it to actually say anything about that, but anyway, so that was all kind of interesting. There are a lot of schools that UT likes to measure themselves against. We did fairly well compared to the peer institutions they look at. They have a group called aspirational peers that are generally considered higher quality than UT is, and that's what they want to be. And schools like Purdue and Michigan State and all, and they ranked higher than UT. So as you expect, but
always with this list, there's a lot of talk about, does it really mean anything? Should anybody really care about it? I feel like college administrators and faculty members especially tend to be can be quite dismissive of it, but they also realize that for better or worse, that U.S. News list, because they've been doing it for so long, they have this methodology. It is one that people pay attention to. We're talking about it right here.
Yeah.
But this year, there was even more pushback against it than usual because there was a whole controversy with the ranking of Columbia, right?
Yeah. You're right. Every year when it comes out, the administrators at these schools that are ranked really high talk about how great it is that they're ranked really high. A lot of rank and file professors and in schools that might not be ranked as high are a lot more dismissive about it, and really, I think some of the comparisons are really they're really minor. There's not going to be a whole lot of difference between UT at number 46 last year and number 53 this year.
Right.
It's not like UT just suddenly became, worse.
Well, and I feel like in my years of awareness of UT, which goes back to the mid-90s at this point, they've always kind of bounced around between like 45 and 55. They've always been in that range. And I think part of the reason is that, it's the same group of schools every year.
Yeah.
And it's not like your top-ranked public schools, Chapel Hill, Ann Arbor, Michigan, are going to suddenly plummet from the top 10 to 50th from one year to the next. It just doesn't really work that way. Although it did with Columbia this year. Yeah.
Columbia University, it's an Ivy League school, one of the most prestigious schools in the country. It's in New York City. Some of the most prominent, people in America have gone to school there. It's a big deal school.
A great journalism program that no journalist can afford to attend.
Right? Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. You would really have to get a full ride to Columbia to be able to work as a journalist after you graduated. But Columbia last year was the number 2 school in the country behind Princeton. This is Princeton's 12th or 13th year in a row of being number 1. But Columbia is up there with Princeton and Harvard and Yale as the top 3 or 4, and Stanford as the maybe the top 5 schools in the country. And this year, they initially were going to be thrown out of the rankings altogether. They turned in some faulty data. Some of the data that U.S. News uses is reported by the school. Some of it's available by third party, and some of it is and this is one of the reasons people don't like it so much is a reputational survey of presidents and deans and chancellors, and so they're supposed to rank these schools based on their prestige. And yeah, it's easy to throw Columbia at the top. It's a lot harder to figure out where the University of Tennessee might go, or Rutgers at Newark. So that gets a lot of attention there. But a mathematics professor at Columbia discovered that Columbia had submitted incorrect data and made it known. And the U.S. News initially said, well, we'll just not rank them, and they ended up deciding to put them in. I would love to know what the politics behind that decision were.
Because they stayed in the top 20, right?
They dropped to 18, number 18.
Yeah.
So they went from number 2 to number 18, which is a huge drop, especially at that altitude of academia. But it also goes to show that these rankings really ought to be taken with a grain of salt.
Yeah.
Because even if I mean, and that's what the math professor, whose name escapes me at the moment, at Columbia said, well, no matter what happened, anytime you have a school that drops from number 2 to number 18, the whole system's screwed up. Right.
Because it's relying on this self-reported data that is clearly not being checked. The whole methodology that U.S. News uses is called into question there. And don't want to just single out U.S. News. There are other publications that do the same thing. Wall Street Journal has one. Washington Monthly has one. They use slightly different criteria, but yeah, it's always interesting to see what the jockeying is with some of these places, and then what people say about them. And this year was a little bit different. It'll be interesting to see what U.S. News does next year. Right, to try to
as far as changing because they'll change their methodology. They changed a little bit this year to account for COVID-19. So they'll be changing it again, I'm sure, to try to keep this from happening again. And so we'll see what they come up with.
We'll come back and talk about it again next
year.
They'll say, should we really be talking about this, paying attention? But we will, because it's
because we do.
Well, and people do pay attention to it.
Yeah. Well,
we might think they shouldn't. But.
Well, we might think they shouldn't. There are a lot of people in academia who might think they shouldn't. But there was a survey of entering college freshmen from 2019 that showed that 15% of them did care. They did take that into consideration.
Their applications.
In making their applications and making their decisions, if they were accepted by multiple schools, making their decisions on where they would want to go. So, 15% isn't a majority, obviously, but it's a big number.
Right. Schools can't afford to just ignore it.
Right.
Yep. Well, speaking of rankings, we had another ranking this past week. Also data that some people are skeptical of, and this was the State Department of Education came out with their district and school level accountability data. And so this is basically crunching, first of all, standardized tests, the ones that were just administered last spring across the state, which that you start out there with a lot of teachers and others who are sort of skeptical of the value and the emphasis that is placed on these standardized tests. And then they also look at factors like chronic absenteeism and an interesting category called academic growth, which turned out to be quite important in Knox County's case this year. And they've been, the state has of course been giving TCAP, TN Ready. I mean, they sort of changed the names of the tests, but they've been giving these for a good while now. But they kind of keep changing the system. They keep changing what they're doing with this. So this current method of these accountability designations only goes back to 2018 was the first year that they did it with the new the setup they're using right now, kind of under Bill Lee, or I guess it was the year right before Bill Lee came in as governor. And there were 2 years of it in 18 and 19, and then they didn't give the tests at all in 20 because of the pandemic. In 21, they did give the standardized tests, but they kind of agreed they were going to hold everybody harmless for the results because that school year also was very disrupted by the pandemic in lots of different ways. And so this was the first year, we had 2 years off. So the last time that these rankings came out, Knox County was at and it's overall, you're giving one ranking to the entire school system. Knox County is a huge school system. It's almost 60,000 students. It's got rural, suburban, urban schools, just a wide socioeconomic range. Still, Knox County as a whole ranked satisfactory in 2019, the last time they had this, which is kind of the middle category. There are 5 categories. This year, they were in the very bottom category, which is called in need of improvement. It puts you in the bottom 5% of school districts in the whole state, which is unusual for Knox County. Knox County usually kind of holds up, at least in the middle ground. It usually scores pretty well among the large urban systems. But this year, those other large systems, Hamilton County, Chattanooga, was at satisfactory. And then both Shelby County and Davidson County, Metro Nashville, were at the next level above that, advancing, sort of the second highest, showing that they had shown a lot of gains from the previous year. And where Knox County really got hurt this year was, first of all, on chronic absenteeism, which is interesting because I don't feel like we hear a lot of talk about that. There's so much talk about sort of academic methodology and curricula and, should we do phonics? Should we do this? Is it better to have kids online or in the classroom, or like just all these different arguments? But we don't talk a whole lot about just like, are the kids showing up? And that, of course, is really important. And that's why the state puts a fair amount of emphasis on it.
Yeah, and if you don't show up, nothing matters.
Right. All of the rest of that stuff.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. Phonics doesn't matter. Standardized tests don't matter. If you don't show up, you're not in the game.
Well, and teachers will tell you that what you really lose with a kid who's out a lot is continuity and consistency. Yeah. They start on something, but then they're not there to finish it, or they miss an assignment and they never get a chance to make it up. All of these kinds of ways that puts kids farther and farther behind, and it makes it hard for them and for their teachers to get them caught up. And so Knox County this past year had 27% of its students missed at least 18 days of school. 18 days is 10% of the school year. The school year is 180 days. So that's a lot. It's a lot to be out, and that's a lot of kids to be out. And so Superintendent John Ryswick called a press conference to talk about these rankings this past Wednesday out at Copper Ridge Elementary School, which was one of a small number of schools in the district that scored at the top in the state. So they did take the opportunity to kind of highlight what they say is some of the good work going on. But he talked about absenteeism and he and his administrators. And, they basically said that in those couple of years of the pandemic, of the height of the pandemic, they really de-emphasized that a lot. It was so hard. It was so complicated. There were so many things going on. People were getting COVID and being out. Teachers were out. And so it's not that they weren't emphasizing attendance, but it didn't have quite the same push behind it. And so now they're going to come back with a little more structured, and up until the pandemic, they had a whole system set up where once a student missed X number of days, their parents, and this was in conjunction with juvenile court, because you can be charged and truancy can actually land you in juvenile court. Parents would have to come in for meetings. So they're going to start doing that again and really just trying to emphasize the importance of kids being there. The other major category that they struggled in was what they call academic growth. And this is also based on those standardized tests, but it's not about the kids' actual grade or result. It's how much did they improve in that subject from the previous year. And the idea there is that wherever that kid starts out, it's the job of the teacher in the school to kind of advance them from there. And so that measure is interesting because you can have schools that have quite high achieving students that still have low growth, and that it can actually be a challenge for schools that have really high achieving students, because if your kids are already kind of
if they're already up here, they can't go much higher.
Right, exactly.
If you're down here, you got all kinds of room.
Yeah, and sometimes you will see actually low performing schools with students who score pretty low can actually have quite high growth scores because they showed a lot of advancement from the year before. Knox County, again, the last year that these rankings came out, they got a 5 out of 5. The growth metric is a scale of 1 to 5. They got a 5 out of 5 2 years ago. This year they got a 1.
Ooh.
So that's a huge change. It's a huge drop. Again, Ryswick talked about the pandemic and the disruptions and just kind of how hard it's been for everybody to kind of... But of course, everybody in the state has been dealing with that in one way or another, and we still ranked at the bottom. There are a lot of teachers who are very skeptical of the whole value-added assessment model that's used to measure academic growth. This has been, a debate for 20 years now about whether this is really data that we ought to be making decisions on. Nevertheless, it factors heavily into the state's metrics. And Ryswick, who of course has only been superintendent now for, he came in June, so 3 months, basically 3 or 4 months. He called a press conference and, had surrounding him, the Mike Odom from Knoxville Chamber, Matt Ryerson from United Way, sort of a bunch of community leaders, and just saying, this is something we're all going to work on together. It's going to take the whole community. It's going to be hard, but we're really going to get focused. And so I guess we'll see, Ryswick said there's not going to be a quick fix to any of this. On the other hand, because so much of this stuff, is pegged to these state tests, there can be fluctuation from year to year, and especially as we see in that academic growth category. So just because Knox County is in the bottom 5% this year is certainly not an indicator that that's where they're going to land next year. But in a way, this is a big challenge for Ryswick right out of the gate, but it's also an opportunity for him, I would say, because he was the chief academic officer for the 5 years prior. Still, he's new at the very top. He's new kind of running the show, and this gives him a chance to, he's kind of starting out at the bottom, and he can build his way up.
Nowhere to go but up.
Yeah. So, sticking with education.
It was an education week.
Lots of education this week. There's been this issue at the university, we'll go back to campus,
UT, yes.
About the College of Arts and Sciences and a proposal to potentially break it up into smaller schools. What's going on there?
Yeah, we've talked about this before. The university's administration is looking at taking the College of Arts and Sciences, which is the largest college on campus, and splitting it up. The most common proposal that you hear, it's not really a proposal because that sounds like it's formal, but the most common arrangement that gets talked about is taking the natural history and math, or natural sciences and math, and taking them and making
the hard sciences, as we say,
and giving them their own college, and then the arts and the humanities and social sciences stay in their own college. We had reported that there were a lot of faculty members who didn't like that. We've also reported that Chancellor Plowman has been meeting with faculty members in the school to kind of talk about what's going on. Essentially they are going to restructure in some way. But the university's faculty senate decided to do a survey, a poll of arts and sciences faculty members. So they did, and they sent out to more than 700 faculty members and got a really good response. I remember off the top of my head what the response rate was.
430 or so.
Yeah, something like that, yeah. So a pretty good response rate. And just asked them about it, and the overwhelming majority of them want things to stay the way they are. They do not want to cut it up, and it's 73% of the respondents said that. Only 8% said, yeah, let's split up the school. There's another option they have. The other option would be to keep the college intact, but then bring in administrators for each of those departments. Or they're not really departments. They're above. They look at them as divisions of the college. There are 4 of them. The natural
Instead of having separate colleges, you would have sort of 4 divisions with their own.
Yeah, and they would have their own dean
Mm-hmm.
and give them that title, and so that's kind of a hybrid solution. And then the other one was the splitting up of the school, and only 8% wanted that. And they went if you went by academic division, even in the natural sciences, which hard sciences, which would have their own college under what is the most common arrangement that the administration's talked about, only 54% said yeah, or no, only 54% said they did not want
Right. So even a majority, because that's something that Chancellor Plowman has said in some of these meetings, that because she's kind of said this back to some of the humanities
Yes.
faculty who have spoken up against it and saying, well, some of your colleagues in the natural sciences actually are quite favorable toward this.
Yeah.
This survey, at least, seemed to say that even there's a majority. I mean, there were more of them who
Yeah.
were maybe amenable to changes than people in the other. And of course, the big concern from a lot of faculty members seems to be that this is a way to kind of peel away what the university administration perceives as the high value natural sciences schools, the ones that can generate a lot of research dollars, the ones that kind of have the STEM focus that our government at lots of levels is talking about, and kind of isolate to some degree the humanities and arts and
foreign languages,
liberal arts, right?
And sociology and all that. Yeah, that it is widely perceived as that's what it is. It's a budgetary thing, and UT does have a new budgeting process that's very complicated, and it seems like it would have an impact on this as well. But even the faculty of hard sciences that you would think theoretically would benefit from having a separate college, even a majority of them don't want the split to occur.
Which doesn't mean it won't happen.
Doesn't mean it won't happen. I mean, there are a lot of employers out there who make decisions their employees don't like.
Right.
I can think of a couple that one of my former employers made the concern.
And they don't even do surveys.
And they don't do surveys. They just come and tell you that you're gone. Anyway, the upshot is if they do move forward with splitting up the College of Arts and Sciences, it will be over the overwhelming objections of the faculty. They are not wanting to do this, and they have several reasons that they don't want it to happen. And part of it is that if you're in the same college, there's a practically mandated, or at least there's a greater likelihood of interdisciplinary collaboration between departments, which can go away if you've got a separate college.
Right. These just become more complicated.
They become more complicated. One of the issues that's been brought up was that was with the foreign languages departments. The Haslam College of Business dropped its requirement for students to have a foreign language. So business students aren't taking foreign language classes in as big numbers anymore, which means there are fewer foreign language classes that are offered. And if the hard sciences and if they have their own college, they could do the same thing.
Right. They can set their own.
They can set their own requirements, and they can drop foreign language as a requirement, which it is now because they're in the College of Arts and Sciences. They can drop it, and that would harm those schools. And other requirements that currently, they have to take other classes within the College of Arts and Sciences. They might not have to take those in the future. So that would have an impact on those
Could shrink
programs.
those departments. If they're not having as many students, then it's going to be hard for them to have as many faculty.
Yeah, there's kind of that an atrophy that can occur.
All right. Well, continue to watch that. Obviously,
absolutely. One of the things is there's not a timeline really, so they're going to take this, and who knows what they'll end up doing with it. But it's going to be on down the road before they make a decision on kind of where they want to go, if they want to split it up or keep it intact.
Right. Well, we will follow it either way.
Absolutely.
One other thing I wanted to mention in the non-education realm, but back in the realm of county politics, there was a little bit of continued fallout this past week from what we talked about a couple of weeks ago, the interesting election of county commission chair, where Courtney Durrett, the Democrat, was named commission chair with 5 Republican commissioners voting for her, including 4 Republican women who have been it's interesting because, all 6 of the women on commission voted to make Durrett the chair, including the 4 Republican women. And then Richie Beeler, the former chair, also changed his vote to vote for Durrett. So actually there were 5 Republicans who voted for Durrett. But only the 4 women are attracting ire and finger wagging from sort of like assorted party elders. And so this past week, the Knoxville Focus, which of course the community newspaper that's owned by publisher Steve Hunley, came out with a column both from Hunley himself, who's kind of like a Republican Party power broker in North and East Knox County, and former Congressman Jimmy Duncan, who writes a regular column for the paper. Both wrote columns, so 2 columns in the same issue, kind of lambasting and lamenting this vote and saying that it was a betrayal of principles by, again, the 4 Republican women, and 3 of them, Gina Oster, Rhonda Lee, and Kim Frazier, are new to commission. They were just sworn in, so lots of talk about how, this is your very first act on commission is to vote for a Democrat. There is even some talk that there could be repercussions down the road for some of them in terms of people challenging their Republican Party credentials if and when they run for re-election. Who knows? That's a 2 to 4 years out. But it is still bubbling out there. There's still a level of discontent, and it is also interesting that nobody seems mad at Richie Beeler. It's kind of like they're mad at the women for their vote, and Richie Beeler, it's kind of like, well, he was being chivalrous or something. He was just being a nice guy. We're not going to hold it against him. Anyway, that is still bubbling, and there may actually be even a little more to say about that next week. Speaking of next week, now we are to the point of looking ahead next week. We do not have an interview this week again. But we will probably have one next week. We're hoping to. We've had a couple of things that haven't come together. That's fine. It happens. We try to be very flexible here on the podcast. But we do have a couple of public meetings coming up next week. County Commission is meeting. That same commission, Courtney Durrett is going to chair her very first commission work session on Monday at 5 o'clock in the City County Building. You can, if you want to come down and see the first ever woman chair of County Commission chair her first ever County Commission work session. It's a kind of historic event.
Well, kind of, sort of, yeah.
You can come down and watch that. They have a couple of interesting things on the agenda that they will talk about, some changes to their emergency services contracts with AMR ambulance service, and then also with some of the surrounding volunteer fire and rescue squads. They'll be talking about that. They are naming some new people to the expanded Merit System Council, the Sheriff's Merit System Council, which we talked about earlier in the year. That could be a little bit interesting because Gina Oster, who we just talked about, one of the new commissioners, is the former chair of the Merit System Council. And while she was there, she clashed fairly significantly with people, including Sheriff Tom Spangler and County Commissioner Larson Jay, who were pushing for changes to it. And so it will be interesting to see what thoughts she may have about who commissions should name to this new expanded body and how all of that shakes out. And then on Tuesday, we have...
City Council. there's not a whole lot of really exciting, really, politically divisive things that I can tell so far that nobody's told me about being too divisive. There is one interesting thing. We talked about this before as well, and it's the that Condoro marble property in South Knox County, or South Knoxville, down in Vestal. There's the Condoro marble building, the old showroom that is now a community arts center. Beautiful building, lots of Tennessee marble, and that's what it was built for, to showcase different types of Tennessee marble. It's where where Festival is held every year. Well, the property next to it, which also used to be part of the same marble works, the owners of it want to rezone it to be more heavily, have a heavier industrial use. That was rejected in the Planning Commission. They're appealing that. They're coming to City Council.
The community is against it.
The community's dead set against it. It's kind of run down. It could have been also added to the National Register along with the showroom itself, but they didn't.
The owners aren't interested in that.
The owners didn't want to, and they want to use it for industrial use, and the Planning Commission rejected that, and so they're appealing that on Tuesday. There are a couple of other things that are going on. They're going to be asked to approve almost $250,000 for the community schools effort, Knox County Schools. People talk a lot about how the city government doesn't have anything to do with schools. Well, they do. They nibble a little bit on the sides, and one of the things is helping to fund the community schools program. So that's going to be on there. They're going to approve their annual contract with the chamber, $631 million to the chamber for economic development. They're also going to be looking at appropriating money for permanent supportive housing for senior citizens in East Knoxville. I believe 50 units of housing there. So they're doing a lot of things, but I don't know that and I don't even think that the Condoro marble thing will get a whole lot of traction on City Council.
It's a little hard to imagine council reversing Planning Commission on something that the community doesn't seem to want, and that the planning staff itself also recommended against.
The planning staff, the community, the City Council representative Tommy Smith is
and Erin Gill from the city administration, didn't she actually speak at Planning Commission against it?
Yes,
so obviously Mayor Concanon is not in favor of this either.
Yeah, it's we could spend some time going on the history of the ownership of that property, but we will run out of time.
Maybe later.
If it turns out to be a real thing this week, maybe we can talk about it next week.
Right. All right. Well, I think that about wraps us up. Anything else we need to talk about?
I think we're good to go.
I managed to make my drink last this whole show. So, Seth, thanks for the rum and the production as always.
Absolutely.
Our theme music is by Will Wright. And we will see you all next week.
Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And many thanks to William Wright for composing our theme song. Compass Points is a partnership of Barking Shark Media and Barbarian Productions. and recorded by Lord Seth A. Barber at Barbarian Studios, Knoxville, Tennessee.